Mark chapter 8. We've seen Jesus interacting with some Gentiles and in their areas. Went to Tyre and Sidon. He interacted with the woman who had the possessed daughter. And some fairly well-known conversation there, I think, for those of us anyways who've been in the church for a while, to let the children be filled first. Jesus would say, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. This is after she came and she kept asking, and Matthew even says that she called him the son of David. So we talked about how she might know that connection because the king of Tyre in David's time was a good friend of David and treated Solomon well because he had loved David so well. They'd had such a great relationship. So possible that in this area that they knew of David, they knew of a Messiah to come, that some of the teachings or maybe even some of the writings of David. As we're going through the Psalms on Wednesday night, we find many of the Psalms of David have messianic meanings or comments in them. Sometimes it's a verse or two, sometimes it's the whole chapter or the whole psalm. And so it's possible that if Hiram had loved David so much that he had some of David's writings there, that they had maybe possibly been passed down or taught about in that area to the point where this woman would know or have some knowledge anyways. And when Jesus comes and his fame has grown, and so when he comes to that area and she knows who it is, she goes to him as Messiah, but she's a Gentile. And she asked, to heal my daughter, to deliver my daughter, and he pulls her faith out of her. I don't think he makes his comment with the intent that he wasn't going to do anything for her, but it was to pull her faith out publicly and see that she had understanding of the situation, she had understanding of who he was, and she would respond to his, it's not proper to take the food from the children and throw it to the dogs or to the little dogs, the puppies. And she would say, yes, but even the little dogs eat from the crumbs of the children. So the things that fall on the floor, the things that come off the table. And again, in Matthew, Matthew has a little more detail to it, obviously, but he's amazed at her faith and commends her for it. And she finds out that at the moment that Jesus said, all right, your daughter's delivered, that when she gets home, that time she was delivered. The demon had left. She goes home, she finds her already in her right mind. There's no recipe, there's no process to have to go through to deliver her daughter. He doesn't send her home with procedures. He just says, hey, your faith, because of your faith, it's done. And the implication in the Greek is that it was completely done. It was done permanently. This wasn't a clean the house and not fill anything with it and 7 more would come back. Or the same demon was coming back with 7 of his buddies. This is done completely, never to happen again. And then you have the deaf mute man that Jesus touches and heals, and then he goes and he's in the, lost my place here for a second. At the healing of this man, he tells them, don't tell anybody. But it says here that the more he commanded them not to tell anybody, the more they told people. And he couldn't hide, and he couldn't get a break, and everything, people kept coming to him, and he did all of these things that, by the way, he's prophesied to do for the nation of Israel, but now he's doing it for the Gentiles. And even this story we're going to get into now, the feeding of the 4,000, is in a Gentile area, primarily Gentiles in this crowd. So it's 4,000 men. Then you add in women and children, you could easily double the crowd. And it's in a an area that is, well, you're in the Decapolis. You're back in the area of where the demoniac had been, the one who wanted to leave with Jesus after he had been delivered. And Jesus said, no, you stay here. You go show your friends, your family, what the Lord has done for you. So that when they come back, you have a crowd. You have people waiting on him to come and to heal. In verse 1, it says, in those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the multitude because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their own houses, they will faint on the way, for some of them have come from afar. And then his disciples answered him, how can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? So there's a couple of key words there in verse 4. It says these people. That kind of indicates also that the prejudice may be coming out in the disciples a little bit. How are we going to satisfy these people? Like, at first I thought, how do you forget what's happened with the feeding of the 5,000? You have a couple loaves of bread, you have a couple fish, and yet you do this great miracle, and you feed all these people, and they collect 12 baskets. How can you forget that? But this is done among people that the disciples really are like, why are we even here? We came here once before. They wanted you to leave. You delivered somebody who was terrorizing them, and they wanted you to leave. And now we're back. And now there's a crowd. But what are we going to do for these people? Like, these miracles only belong to Israel. That the Messiah was not here for the whole of the world, that he couldn't have compassion on everybody. It was for Israel. And while it's true that he came to Israel first, and that was part of the conversation between him and the woman earlier, and we know from Paul's writings that salvation came first to the Jews and then to the Gentiles. And Jesus himself is going to say in the book of Acts, you're going to be my witnesses in Judea and Jerusalem, or Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria. He's hitting that edge. He's right there again where the prejudice has got to be overcome to deliver the message in Samaria and to the ends of the earth. In this next few stories in this chapter, we're going to see Jesus is trying to get his disciples to understand this isn't going to just be a home game. Right? This isn't just for Israel. This isn't we're going to build up Israel, I'm going to establish my kingdom, and we're just going to rule the world like Rome has ruled the world. This is going to be delivered to everyone. Salvation is going to go to everyone. The word is going to spread to everyone. Everyone's going to have a chance to follow Jesus, to submit to him as their Lord, their Savior, their Messiah, their King. Everyone. Now, he starts off his comments with, I have compassion on the multitude. Remember, at home with Israel, they're tired. They've been out in the area, in the cities. They've come back. They're trying to get away for a few minutes to just kind of talk about what's been going on, what they've seen, what happened in their ministry time out away from him. And this crowd shows up, and they're tired, and they're like, Lord, you need to send them away. Right? After they've worked among them for a little bit, send them away. Because they got to go back, and you don't want them to be too hungry and not be able to make it home. So we need to send them away so they can go find something to eat. And Jesus said, you feed them. Well, what are we going to feed them? All we have is, a few little breadsticks and a couple of sardines. That's all we have. What are we going to do with this? And Jesus has them set the crowd down. And they sat down in groups of 50 and 100, if I remember right. And they go out and they serve these people. He blesses the food. He begins to break it and hand it out so they can go out and deliver it. and they're fed until they're like Thanksgiving Day stuffed. But Jesus looks at this crowd and they don't have a chance to say, send them away. He just looks at them and says, I have compassion on them. Now, this isn't just, you know what, I kind of care about these people. We need to feed them. This is, I'm feeling this deep in me, in my bowels, in my guts. This is deep. I have sympathy for them. I love them. I have compassion for them. He wants them to know that he's there not because, he just wants to do a good deed for the Gentiles. He's there because he really loves these people. He's not working in your life or in my life because he wants to do a good thing. Or simply because he wants to be glorified. That's the end result, hopefully, with us, that we are responding properly, that we respond with honoring God and testifying about God and what he's done for us. That's the proper end result for it. That's the hopeful end result for it. But he moves on us because he loves us. He stepped into our lives because he loves us, and he loves us deeply. He doesn't just love us because he's God and that's what he's supposed to do. He loves us deeply. He has a huge desire to be a part of your life. I've been being reminded of this by God for a while now. That he loves me deeply. He loves all of us deeply. And I think if I can go back and pinpoint it to any time, it's a couple of years ago when we were going through Matthew, and we hit the verse, the warning of Jesus, that in the last days, the love of many will grow cold. And remember, we went into 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We took a time away from Matthew, just with that one verse, and we moved into 1 Corinthians 13, and we saw what love is. And it's been on my mind, and it's been a part of many of the messages that I've brought, whether it's here or whether it's in other places when I've had, or just in conversations in counseling. The warning, the last days, this time that we live in, the love of many is going to grow cold. When I hear the frustrations of people who are frustrated with other people, listen, don't let your love grow cold. We've been warned that we're going to be faced with that temptation to just cave in and give up. And we're just going to exist until the Lord comes and calls us out. And I'm tired of this, and I'm tired of that, and I'm frustrated with this person or that person, and I'm done. I'm done. Until God takes me home, I'm not doing anymore. He's just going to have to come and get me. But we know that's not what he wants. And listen, on any given day, that's all of us. I'm not, but he says to them, listen, I look at the guy in the mirror and say, have this conversation much more than I have with anybody else, all put together. You can't stop. You can't let your love grow cold. You are answering to somebody else. You're acting on behalf of somebody who loves you deeply. So much so that he took on a shameful death for you in front of everyone. So much so that he took on the wrath of God so that you don't have to. You know, when Paul would tell the Corinthian church that we're going to pass through a refining fire, that is not where our moment in the wrath of God. Do you understand that? We're not going to get just a shade of the wrath of God. We're not going to get just a little bit of the wrath of God, and that's what's going to burn up all that stuff. It is a cleansing fire. It is what completes the cleansing. It's not wrath. It's going to burn up everything that we did for ourselves. Every kind of selfish ambition that was there when we walk in and we stand in his presence. I think his glory just blows through us, around us, consumes everything that's still wrong with us, so that when it's done, we stand as pure refinement in front of him. It is not a glimpse of what he got on the cross. It's not wrath. It's not a final payment for a final sin. It is the clearing away of the rubbish that's left in our life, because it can't enter into heaven. And it's dead, worthless rubbish because it's already been paid for on the cross. And so it'll burn up just like that. It'll have no life left in it when we're standing in front of him. Your sin has no life. The only life it has is the life we keep trying to give it when we keep trying to resurrect our sin. There's no life left in our sin as far as he is concerned. He looks at you and me, and he has this deep, moving compassion, and he did on this Gentile crowd. Now, we have to be careful when we go through this story not to be like, yeah, disciples, how come you didn't get this? Because they're not Gentiles. Because they'd been taught from a young age a Gentile was going to be the fuel for the flames of hell. That's what they existed for. Because they thought that their nation would rise up and rule. And I think they had a picture of their own little Rome. Powerful, never to be overcome, rule with an iron fist. We see it in their arguing amongst each other about the position that they'll have in the kingdom. What part will you play in the royal court when Jesus is sitting on the throne? To the extent that James and John's mother comes to Jesus and says, grant that my sons will sit one on your right hand and one on your left hand. You know, the boys that want to call down fire from heaven and destroy a village because they didn't receive him. If I remember right, a Samaritan village. Did the prejudice came back out again? Jesus said, I have compassion on this multitude because they have continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I think it's the King James Version says that they were fasting for those 3 days. They didn't eat for 3 days. It's not that they've been eating for 3 days and listening to Jesus, and at the right meal times they sit down and they have a little lunch or they have a little dinner, and they've just been following him. They didn't bother to eat, or they didn't have food. They didn't come prepared to eat. They weren't coming and going. They just came and they stayed and they listened and they watched. And Jesus knows what it's like to go for days without eating. He'd done a 40-day stint in the wilderness right before his ministry started. 40 days in the wilderness by himself. No food. And he sees this in them, and he sees their determination to stay, and they're not worried about food. They're not worried about their self-sustaining or sustaining themselves. They're not worried about that. They just know they can't leave the man that's in front of them. Verse 3, Jesus said, if I send them away hungry to their own houses, they will faint on the way, for some of them have come from afar. Now, we have sitting in front of us the Word of God, the bread, the thing that feeds us. Jesus would say to Satan himself in that temptation that we just talked about, when Satan would say, look, you're hungry, there's some rocks, you're the Son of God, turn those stones into rocks, or turn those stones into bread, turn them into rocks. Big miracle he's asking for there, right? No, turn those stones into bread, satisfy yourself. And Jesus said, it's written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that flows from the mouth of God. And so sometimes the Bible, the scriptures, the Word of God is compared to the food or the bread that we eat that nourishes us, that sustains us. He said, I'm not going to send them away hungry. They still want more of Him. In John chapter 6, he refers to himself and teaches about himself being the bread of life. That, he compares it to Moses having the manna in the wilderness and sustaining the people of Israel, but he didn't call down the bread from heaven. But now I'm telling you, the bread of heaven is standing right in front of you. He's not willing to send them away as long as they're hungry for Him. Maybe we feel from time to time like we're not hearing. We're not seeing God move. Well, maybe we're not hungry. Maybe we fatten ourselves up on a diet of things we shouldn't be fattening up on. And going without those things is supposed to inspire us to, and should, and probably will inspire you to be more hungry for God. Eat from His table instead of the table of the world. And you'll just want more. The more I spend time in the Word, the more I want to. When I take a break and I move away from that and I want to hear something else, or I want to see something else, I want to watch something else, I'm going to start filling my mind with the things and the cares of this world. I move away from His table and I start eating on the table from the world, and I'm still feel satisfied, but it's not good food, man. It's like junk food. It's the difference between the Thanksgiving table at home and, 2 Whoppers at Burger King. Both of them will fill you up, but you will not feel good when you're done with the other one. And it won't stay with you, and you'll need more, and you'll need more, and you'll need more. But many times, most years, I come away from the Thanksgiving day and go to bed and think, I'm not eating again. I don't need to eat. I don't need to eat for days. And there's probably some truth to that. But I want more. And I'll eat a big plate full. And a couple hours later, I'm picking at the chicken. I'm picking at the turkey. And then it's time for pie. What one do you want? All of them? I want them all. So just give you a little piece? No, give me a full piece of each one. These people would not move away, and He would not send them away because they were still hungry for Him. But He wanted to sustain them physically so that they could. So the disciples say, well, how are we going to satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? How do you do that? How do you satisfy people with bread, with something that's good but simple? When they're used to going to their temples, man, and chunking out meat that's been sacrificed to idols. All we have is bread for them. And Jesus says that's all they need. And we find out they have a couple of fish here in this deal too. But this is the main thing. We need the bread. They need me to feed them. They're not worried about their idols. Listen, they have broken away from the things that have filled them for 3 days to stay with me and take what I'm giving them. How many loaves do you have? 7. And we know 7 in the Bible is the number of completion. I don't know how it connects to this. I'm not going to, scholars can dig at that if they want to. All I know is they had 7 loaves of bread. 7 small loaves of bread, I'm sure. I mean, when you have over 4,000 people, listen, when you have 4 teenage boys, if you go to your pantry and all you have is 7 breadsticks, you know that they're going to be fighting over the other 3. They're going to try to figure out how to divide the last 3 up so they can eat them, and then they're going to want more. So this doesn't look like a lot in front of a crowd, even if it was full-on big loaves of bread. I mean, this could be, you could have a 6-foot sub sandwich if you wanted to. 4,000 people, that doesn't look like enough. So they have 7 little loaves of bread. Now, remember I just mentioned that the disciples in the other incident, they went out, they set the people down in their groups and took care of them. Here, so he commanded the multitude to sit. And he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks and broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before them, they set them before the multitude. But he didn't wait. He didn't want to argue about, do I go and talk to these people, or how close do I get to them? How do I do this without defiling myself? I don't know. I don't know what they think. The food, we've already had this whole thing. Remember, it's not what goes in that defiles a person, it's what comes out that defiles a person. They've got a lot in their head right now. But Jesus is taking command of this. So they ate and they were filled, and they took up, verse 7. Huh? He commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. I thought I read that already. And he took 7 loaves and gave thanks, broke them, and gave them to his disciples to sit before them, and they set them before the multitude. Then they also had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said to set them also before them. So they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. Now those who had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away. Immediately got into the boat with his disciples and came to the region of Dalmanutha. It's best you're going to get out of me for that. Then the Pharisees came out and began to dispute with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. But he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation." All right, so Again, I kind of left them just sitting there, but so did Jesus. He feeds them, he satisfies them, gets in the boat, and he leaves. And then at some other point after that, you have the Pharisees coming out to him, and disputing him. And they're testing. They want a sign from heaven. Again, how many more signs do you want? What is going to be the sign? Do they want something coming right out of heaven? Is this not enough to heal the sick, the lame, to raise the dead, to feed people who are hungry, thousands with very little? To what sign do they want? Well, give us a sign from heaven. And I think sometimes people even think that today. You know what? If I could actually hear God, if I could actually hear his voice, if he just, part the sky a little bit and stick his face down here so we could see him, we'd be all good. Those are all things that anytime somebody even came close to that in the Bible, freaked them right out. Scared them to death. And you know what they did? They didn't follow him. In the wilderness, Israel, standing at the mountain, God speaks and everything begins to rumble and the rocks are breaking. And Israel tells Moses, you go and talk to him. We'll just wait for you here. Because we didn't like that. In Revelation, we see that angels are going to fly through the air, spreading the gospel themselves. Now, some people will say, "Oh, that's the satellites." When we started shooting satellites into orbit and we started broadcasting TV everywhere, that was going to be how it was going to happen. That's what that's all about. No, it's not. I believe with all my heart, literal angels are going to fly through the air and they're going to preach the gospel, and people are still going to reject it. In Matthew, he calls them a wicked and adulterous generation that seeks a sign. That it's evil to say to God, show me a sign. I think God's very compassionate still, thankfully for us, when we say, Lord, I just need to know. I don't know which way to go. I don't know what to do. That's a little different than, you know what, I'll believe in you when you show up. Because when he shows up, that's the end. You don't want to wait until he shows up to believe. You don't want to wait until he can call down something out of heaven, or until he does, to believe. Why does this generation seek a sign? Well, we're a lot. The world is just uncertain and unsure about everything. You can't trust anything. The ones who are motivated by pride and power and fueled by the enemy's lies have convinced the world that you can't trust anybody. And that you can't trust God, certainly. It sounds very good when you hear, or to them, when they hear, if God is so big, if God is so great, if God is so good, if God is loving, then why does all the bad happen? Well, they ask that because they don't really want to take responsibility for themselves. They'd like to shift the blame to somebody. The Bible tells us why it happens, because the heart of men is wicked. That's why it happens. Well, how come he doesn't put a stop to it? Do you really want him to? Do you want him today to put a stop to it because you don't believe? And if I'm right, do you really want my God to show up? Because when he shows up, it's going to be judgment. And if you don't believe before you stand in front of him, then your eternity is torment. Do you really want him to come right now? What you need to understand is that right now, even you live under the grace of God. That he is patient, patiently waiting for each person to show up, or not to show up, but to submit to him. That it is not his will that any would perish, but that all would come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. That all would repent. That's what he wants. That's what he wishes would happen. That's what that's what his will would be. But he also knows that it's not. It's not going to happen. And I don't know that this is the right way to say it, but he delays his coming for your sake, for my sake, for their sake. He will come at the appointed time. But that time has been set back. Not set back and then set back again, kind of like the deal of the century. It's not like that. It's not like Trump's peace plan for the Middle East, where it's going to be revealed here. Nope, it's going to be revealed now. Nope, this is unsure, so we're going to push it back. It's not that. His plan will be revealed on exactly the day it's supposed to be. Even in the church, there are congregations, and I've had one person tell me this. You know the Bible. You teach the Bible. You do well. But in my culture, because you don't do the signs and wonders things, they wouldn't listen to you. Doesn't matter if you're right. You have to have the signs and wonders. You have to have the healings and the deliverances. You have to have all of that. And I'm thinking, wow, man, if a congregation's still full of all of that, and that's what they want, and that's what they expect out of somebody, then why are they all still sick and full of the devil? How is it that after generations of that, anybody would visit your congregation or your culture, and that would still be there to even have to address? How is it the house hasn't been cleaned already, and you can't just accept the word of God and see how you're supposed to move and live and represent him? How is it that a man can be right with truth and with love in his heart toward people, but that's not sign enough? How is it that a man can stand out here in our parking lot, an elder from another church, and say, man, if you came to our church, it was getting on me about having had a family reunion. We had the Battle Creek Church, we had Kalamazoo Church. We came down, everybody came together. We had a night of worship and sharing where the churches are at and what they're doing, and have had communion together. He said, you had communion together? Yeah, we had communion together. Well, why would you do that? What do you mean, why would I do that? It's communion. We're believers. We came together. We were remembering Jesus. We were giving him honor for what he's done in our lives and how these ministries have grown with and without, coming from one, coming from others, how they've been birthed and grown into different directions, but still unified. What do you mean? Why would we have communion? Why would I let them have communion here? I said, do you mean to tell me that if I took a Sunday off and I came to your church instead and you were having communion, you wouldn't let me take communion with you? No. Why not? Well, because you weren't saved in our church. We don't know you. We don't know if you're saved. I'm like, what? I said, well, I tell you what, if you ever decide to visit our church on a Sunday morning when we have communion, you are more than welcome to take communion with us. Well, I wouldn't. Well, that's up to you. Well, Jesus only took the ones who were closest to him. He didn't take everybody and have communion. I'm going, you don't even know what was going on that night. It was a Passover meal. They weren't supposed to all be together. They were supposed to be with family. He doesn't understand the Bible. Why does this generation seek a sign? No sign will be given to it. Matthew says that no sign will be given to it except for the prophet Jonah. The sign of the prophet Jonah. So that's an allusion to being buried for 3 days and 3 nights and then coming back out of the tomb, being resurrected. That's the sign that you guys are going to get. You're going to put me on a cross. I'm going to die. I'm going to let you do this. I'm going to let you put me on a cross. I'm going to die for the sins of the world. I'm going to take on the wrath of God. You're going to bury me in a tomb. And he could have gone into great detail. You're going to set soldiers out there. You're going to seal the tomb up, and you're not going to be able to keep me in there. On the third day, I'm coming back. He said enough to them that they did all of those things. That at the cross, when the disciples panicked and they all left and they all fled and went into hiding, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the chief priests, all the religious leaders come together and they say, he said he was going to raise from the dead on the third day. So just so his disciples don't come back and take the body, we're going to put a guard there. We're going to seal the tomb. We're going to make it secure so they can't come and take it. All they did was made it more of a sign. They enhanced the sign. They made it a bigger deal when he finally came out of the tomb. Everything that they had set to keep him in there was nothing when he wanted to come out. An angel rolled away the tomb. The soldiers all fell over like they were dead. And I don't even know that Jesus was even still in the tomb at that point. He was probably already gone. That angel just rolled that stone away to let us in so we could see. The body was gone, resurrected already. You know, there are some things that on this side of salvation I think that is cool. That would be amazing. Be standing outside the tomb, watch the soldiers go down, watch Jesus come out. I can see him smile at me, give me a little wink. Here we go. You know, that's me on this side of salvation. I can't wait to see him. They don't really want to see him. It's like I said, when they do, it'll be too late. And they're going to be afraid. At the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord of all, to the glory of God the Father. Some will be made to kneel. They're going to fall down out of fear. They're just not going to be able to stand. I don't think he's going to have to put his hand on their neck and shove them down. I think they won't be able to stand. I think their body will just give out. And some of us will just move to that position. There'll be no hesitation. We will shout with great confidence. We will know we are in the presence of our King. There will be no fear or trembling in our voice. But those that fear him, it'll sound different. I think. This is just my speculation on the thing too, by the way. This is not. I just can't imagine it being any other way. Somebody who's shaking with fear. Who's lost control of his body. Compared to somebody who will move like a military parade. I've been in them. When a couple hundred people stand in a formation and move in unison. And I've heard the sounds of the heels of boots coming together. The motion of hands going up in salute. Now, it'll be different. because we'll go to our knees. But we will all move, I think, in one motion, like one body. But that's just me. That's letting my imagination run a little bit. But I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see that. Listen, there are days when I wish God would rip the heavens open and say something to me, but I know what He's going to say to me from heaven. He's going to say, "Hey, come up here." He's not going to have to explain the gospel to me. I already know. He's done that. And He does it more and more, and He draws me in deeper and deeper in my heart. Verse 13 says, then he left them, and getting into a boat again, departed to the other side. Now, the disciples had forgotten to take bread, and they did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. And then he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we have no bread. Remember my analogy of 4 teenagers fighting over 7 breadsticks? You got at least 12 guys here trying to figure out how to divide up one loaf. These are hungry. They're rowing across sailing across the ocean or the sea again. And Jesus looks at them and just says, hey, take heed. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And their thinking is it's because we have no bread. He's mocking us because we have no bread. Because we forgot. Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not, or do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Remember, they missed the meaning of the feeding of the 5,000 because their hearts were hardened. He's saying, your heart's still hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said to him, 12. Also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said 7. So he said to them, how is it that you do not understand? Now, I would be afraid to ask you, do you really understand what he just said? Because you have to kind of look at this. You're going, all right, he's saying this to me right now. How in the world do I not completely understand this? There's something to understand here. And probably my explanation here is going to be minimal at best. It'll be simplified way, maybe I missed the mark. I don't know. But I'm going to take a shot at this. You have the Pharisees and you have Herod. He said to them, beware of the leaven. And we know that leaven in the bread is what causes it to rise, causes it to puff up. So in my mind, I'm hearing you beware the pride that the Pharisees and Herod have. So proud that they can't see the Messiah in front of them. So proud that one wants me to come and do magic tricks for him. So proud that he can't admit that he was wrong and set John free rather than take his head off. And his pride got him caught in a situation where he had to do what he didn't want to do. The pride of the Pharisees that keeps coming and contending so hard with the one who is the Messiah that they can't recognize him for who he is. both looking for power over people and control. Herod wasn't really a king. It was a title that Rome just let him have. But it insinuates power. Probably, looks like he has more power than he actually had. The Pharisees have used the scriptures and the Mishnah and the Talmud to control the people and to force them to do things that they themselves didn't do. Manipulated them. Jesus saying, you're going to have power. Just don't be like them. Don't let this become a thing in you that puffs you up and makes you proud. And boy, and we wrestle with that in America, because that is something that we have pounded into people for a long time. Proud to be American. I'm proud to be American. I'm proud to serve my country. I'm proud to do this. I'm proud to be that. I'm proud to be here. Well, for the most part, we may be better off than most of the people in this world. We are not better than most of the people in this world. We're not better than anybody else in this world. We commit the same sins. We just have more resources to make it look better than it really is. We have the same pride and arrogance that everybody else has. We abuse power like nobody else. We demand that people let us be their influence in their lives. We diminish and demean people. All you have to do is listen to the media. Our leadership does it all the time, and we are perfectly willing to carry on their tradition in our schools and in our public forums and on our social medias and in our homes. Rather than humble ourselves to be servants, we're rulers. We see ourselves that way. And we miss the true ruler, the King of the universe. He says, do you remember how I gave them the bread? And they were full. And the first time, 12 baskets, right? Yeah. And you remember how I did it again for the 4,000? And we broke the bread and we gave it to them. And how much did you take up after that? 7 baskets. How do you not understand this? How is it that you don't understand that you're going to have power just like these other guys? You're going to have some authority greater than they have. But God demands that you serve. Do you remember how we had everybody sit down? How I blessed the bread, gave honor to God? Began to break it, and he fed them, not you. You just took the stuff to him. But do you remember how I had you? My closest, my 12, the ones who are arguing about your position in the king's court. You guys. Remember how I had you take the bread to them? How you had to, I didn't have them line up and come and get it for themselves. I had you take it to them. I had you serve them. And not even just your brothers, not just the Jews. But I had you go and serve the Gentiles. Herod would never do that. The Pharisees would never do that. I can remember as a kid, and I don't know how long this would have taken place when it stopped happening, but I can remember when politicians on the campaign trail would show up in soup kitchens and dish out food, probably for photo ops more than anything. They may not have been there more than 15 minutes, tops. Or you might see one of them go out and have a cup of coffee sitting with those people. To look compassionate. How often do you see that anymore? What do? They go to restaurants owned by famous people. The ones who are on the Food Network or whatever else, they have their TV shows and they have they're popular, and it's amazing how the guy who owns the restaurant is always at the restaurant that the candidate will show up at. Because neither one of them wants to miss some fame. But you don't see him walk in and say, hey, I'm buying everybody's dinner today. And I'm going to go back here behind the counter, and I'm going to dish it out to you. They don't have time for that. They go in, they take a couple bites of the guy's sandwich or whatever he's serving. They get their photo op, and they leave. And then they make regulations and tell you how eating like that is unhealthy for you. We need to understand, we have bread that won't ever run out. We have food for the lost, for the poor, for the needy that will never, ever run out. My word, he said, will never, ever pass away. We have that. He has broken it up. He has given it to us to go and to serve other people, to serve it up to other people. To serve it up to those who are tired and have been following him, but we keep feeding them. And we keep having compassion for them. This movement, this Calvary Chapel movement started like that. It started with a man and his wife who walked on the beach and ended up taking home a bunch of hippies that didn't look good, didn't smell good. Pastor Chuck and Kay ended up with them in their house. And he's taught them. And before you know it, they're showing up on Sunday and they're sitting on the floor instead of in the pews with everybody else. And it didn't matter who was there. It didn't matter if there was a businessman there with a tie or a hippie there with his hair tied back. He broke up the bread and he gave it to them. And they began to get strong and healthy spiritually. And they began to move out. And they took the bread then and they went over here and they started a Bible study here and they started a halfway house over here, and they built churches together, and they planted churches together. And even in this movement, though, you see the spirit of the Pharisees and the Herods that have kind of popped up here and there. And it happens with every great movement of the church all through our history. We need to pray about starting more Bible studies. You go, man, we're a little bitty church. We're not, it's not Greg Laurie's church. So what? Pastor Chuck's church wasn't Greg Laurie's church when it started out. It was a small little church. And I don't want to do this so that our church, our building gets full and whatever else. That's not the point. Because I would tell whether we were packed out today or just the few that we have today. It's the same message. Take the bread and go serve the people. Take the bread and go serve the people. He's told us what to do. We can't miss that. Too often, and I'm not pointing the finger here so much, but I've heard other Christians, and they're just like, all they want to, I don't want to do anything. I just want to go on Sunday. I just want to sit there. I want to take it in, let God, feed me, get fed, and that's the thing. You hear, I can't find a church where I can get fed. What do you want to get fed? How about, can you find a church where you can serve? Take the bread and serve. Or they left the church because they're not getting fed. Were you serving? Were you taking the bread and serving? I get leaving a church because of a false teacher. I get that. I get leaving a church because it's devouring itself with separations and divisions, and I get that. But just leaving a church because you've been there for 2.5, 3 years, and now it's time to move on, I don't get that. And it's not even just the people in the pews. Pastors do that. Pastor Chuck, if you ever read his story, when he was with the Foursquare Church, I think he said he had 2.5 years worth of sermons, and he knew it was time to ask for another church when he got to the end of it. And then when he left and when he was getting ready to start the Calvary Chapel thing, he decided just to take a book and teach through it, verse by verse. And it took him forever to get through 1 John. You can start with the Gospel of John. 1 John, a long time. And he's like, wow, pick another book. All of a sudden it's taking years because you're getting through the whole Bible. We've got a whole loaf of bread here, and it's broken up already. Take it and feed people. I'm not asking you to go bake loaves of bread, which we've tried to do before, but I'm not asking you to take bake loaves of bread and then go have a whole bunch of people walk into a big crowd in the park and just start breaking pieces off. Here, I'm feeding you. That's all I'm talking about. I'm talking about take the Bible. Take the Word. It's broken up. Take some fragments. Give them some fragments here. Give them some fragments. They're going to start to get full, and they're going to start to want more. And if you enter into that, and I hope you do, and you enter into Bible studies with family or with friends, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod. Don't get prideful about it. Stay humble about it. Keep serving. Just serve. Just serve. We'll end here today. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word and for the example that comes from these stories that you've provided for us and the accounts of how Jesus ministered and what he did. And Lord, to know that you care for us deeply and expect that to change us into your image, a people who care deeply for others. Lord, I pray that you would show us how to serve your word up to everybody, to anybody. We know from these stories that it won't run out. There is no limit to what you can do. There is no limit to what you're willing to do in changing somebody's life if they will begin to eat your word and Lord, to begin to serve it up. Lord, may we have compassion like you have compassion and not let our love grow cold in these last days. In Jesus' name, amen.